Welcome from two Katies. We've got more Katies than you could ever need today.
I don't know. I love double Katie. I'm really excited about today's episode because actually, business partner Katie, we need to differentiate who we're talking to.
People call me KJ sometimes, so you can.
I've literally never called you that or heard you say that.
People. I said people, not you. It's from my past.
Anyway, KJ and I go way back. But actually, I met our other Katie Hunt, long before I knew business partner Katie. So, Katie Hunt, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can talk about how our paths have crossed before too.
Totally. Well, thanks ladies for having me. This is super fun to chat with you today. Yeah, I am a business coach and strategist. I primarily help product-based business owners sell wholesale. So our alumni sell their products to big stores like Anthropologie and Container Store and Nordstrom and Starbucks. And then they also, the bread and butter of who they sell to though is like the independent retail shops. So the mom and pops or even the mid-sized retailers that have multiple locations. And so I have a program we've been running since 2011 called Paper Camp, even though we don't just focus on paper anymore, but how do you change the name after 45 rounds of a program? It's a little tough. But yeah, we teach people like the nuts and bolts of selling wholesale. So how to get your product ready, how to get your sales tools ready, your marketing, all of that. And the way I got into this is I had a product-based business. I was selling stationery goods, and I came from a really corporate background in business development and marketing. And as I got further into the industry, I saw that all of my colleagues were incredibly, insanely talented artists, but they were scared of the business side or they struggled with the business side. And here I was struggling on the art side and, excelling on the business side. And I said, let's put our heads together and I can help you and you can help me. And, we can all just grow faster together. And now it's morphed into this like beautiful thing. I still kind of pinch myself every day to think I get to do this work and it's really rewarding. So that's who I am and that's what I do.
I love that.
The power of community and collab at work. I love it. Yeah, we love examples of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And actually I met Katie Hunt because I got a scholarship to attend one of her live events.
Yep.
Trade show.
What year was that?
That was before we rebranded. That was when we were Trade Show Boot Camp. That was several years ago. I don't remember which year. Do you, Alana?
I think it was like maybe 2012, 2013. And basically I had a stationery shop I was selling on Etsy and I had no idea what I had no idea what I was doing basically, as one does. And
we all start in the same place though, right?
Yeah, actually.
We don't know.
Exactly. And I believe I'm pretty sure. So there was a local letterpress printer in my town, Rachel from Pistachio Press. And she, I believe, recommended I look into your programs. And I got a scholarship. I went out to LA and I soaked up so much information, met the coolest people. And it's actually funny because the more I learned, the more I actually was able to align and say, oh my God, I don't want to wholesale my work, which was such a good lesson because I had no idea what I was doing. And it's what really brought me to licensing. But I still kept making stuff and like trying to scale until I really had a full grasp. But I owe so much of that to your program. It was incredible.
Thank you so much. I love that you shared this whole, it told me what I did not want to do because to be honest, that's one of my favorite takeaways when people come to me and they say this program was awesome, but it told me what I do not want to do. And I always say to them, fantastic. I don't want you wasting any time, money, energy, heading in a direction, taking your art in a direction that doesn't truly make sense for you long term. And so, if we can do that in a 4-week program or when we used to meet in person for 2 days and you can walk away with clarity there and know that you can focus elsewhere, fantastic. I mean, obviously those that want to move forward, I'm going to help you all the way, but it's also really impactful to know this isn't something I want to pursue.
Right. And I did it is not in any way to say that I didn't take things away because I still ran my stationery shop and I actually did scale and wholesale my work and was able to grow it to a place where I eventually was able to say, actually, I think I'm growing it bigger than I want it to be. And so I was able to focus more on retail instead of wholesale, but I was able to take everything I learned about the wholesale world and apply it to just being a retail shop owner.
Yeah. And a lot of it's just basic business too, right?
Yeah. For sure.
I just wanted to tell you how I met you virtually. Yeah. I mean, we're kind of first face-to-face meeting right now, but I feel like I've known you for years and you're my own personal friend that just didn't know you weren't involved in the friendship.
Well, one-sided friendship.
Yeah, totally. But I listened to your podcast like religiously, and I got into wholesale too because of you at first. And I also went through a similar journey as Alana, where I did do the whole wholesale thing and then realized maybe it's not my ultimate end game just for my particular brand of strengths and weaknesses. And the shipping stuff particularly was where I got I got held up. But there's ways around that. We can even talk about that. But anyway, I got led into licensing because of you. And you had a podcast episode where you were talking to a Fresh Bunch, which is a licensing agency. And I think during that episode, I was like, I'm going to email them and pitch myself. And she was like explaining exactly how she would like to see a pitch. And I was like, oh, I'm perfectly positioned to do this.
Yeah.
And so I pitched her and they took me on, and I ended up working with a Fresh Bunch for quite a while. So all due to you, Katie. Thank you.
Oh, girl, you did the hard work, but I'm so happy that that episode helped you. I do love hearing. I mean, we have, I think, 375 or more episodes at this point on this little show. And well, because I only do weekly. Like there was a time where everyone was moving to twice a week, and I was like,
that's a lot of
that's
episodes.
My actual nightmare.
Oh, okay. It's a lot. I agree. It's a lot. But anyhow, we thank you. It's always nice to hear that, like, you know, the work we do behind the scenes, and just the same for you two ladies. You're impacting so many people with this podcast and the, you know, the programming you run and everything else. And it's just nice to hear the feedback. So thank you for that.
Oh, yay. I'm glad. And such an amazing community that you've built. Yeah, so many years later, it's just been such a wonderful place to be. But I'd love to talk. I guess the first thing I want to know, knowing our audience, what do you think? So our audience has a lot of people who have a shop. Oh, probably most people who are listening have had a shop before, but they maybe haven't taken it to the place where you really shine, which is bringing it into that wholesale space. Do you think that there's like a specific holdup for people from tapping into holdup? Like tapping into wholesale? Why aren't people tapping into it?
And what is it?
Feel back. Oh yeah, so maybe we should start there. Yeah.
What is wholesale? Should we start with what is wholesale?
We should probably start there. Yeah.
Okay. So wholesale basically means that you are taking your products and you're selling it to a store who then turns around and sells your products to the end consumer. So whoever is buying your gifts for themselves or buying your items rather as a gift for somebody else or for use in their own home or their own, you know, body, whatever it might be, whatever type of products you sell. And so it's very different than selling direct to consumer. If you are selling on Etsy, you are selling direct to consumer retail. You are selling it directly to the person who's using or gifting your product. With wholesale, we're selling it to a store who then turns around and sells it to that end consumer. So it really is a different mindset shift because you're selling business to business. And what you need to tell that business in order for them to say yes to purchasing from you is very different than what we are going to tell that end consumer, right? Like the end consumer wants to know how that product is going to make them feel or how it's going to look in their home. There's like a real emotion that's behind their buying decisions. But when you're selling wholesale, it's very tactical. It's very logistical. It's when do I need the product? How are the profit margins going to work with my budget? What else am I going to be merchandising in my store and how will this work with that? So thinking through just that piece of it, it's just a very different buying experience and it's a very different customer that you're selling to. So therefore, a lot of, the semantics of shipping out the products and stuff can be the same, but how you're marketing, how you're selling, how you're connecting with those wholesale customers is very different than how you're connecting with the end consumer. So I just want to make that really clear as we head into this. But you asked about like why people don't make the jump to sell wholesale. And I think it boils down to two things. One of them is mindset and just like knowledge base. They don't know what they don't know, which we kind of already alluded to when we were talking earlier. So they don't know what's involved. They don't know how to get started. They don't know what it means to wholesale, right? Like they understand the basics, but they don't know how do I get my products to do that. So there's that knowledge gap that needs to be filled. But then also there's the logistical piece of it. There are some very key things that you need to have in place before you start wholesaling. And I actually have a free private podcast about, is wholesale right for you? And I run through all of those things that you need to think about and know before you even consider whether wholesale is the right next step for you. So I can share
So
that link with all of
helpful.
you guys for the show notes, but it's prooftoproduct.com/private pod. But like, do you have enough of your product? Do you have the means to make product quickly in case somebody came and asked for 1,000 units of something by next week? There's nuance to the wholesale side of things that's very different than selling in an Etsy shop or selling direct to consumer on Shopify. And so I would say those are the two main things, like the understanding of what it entails to sell wholesale and kind of the mindset behind, like, am I wanting to do this? And then the logistics of, is the product line ready? Is my business foundation ready?
I think all the things you said are definitely a holdup for a lot of people. And I think it's such an amazing opportunity to scale. I mean, I had products and I was like, well, where am I going to put? You kind of come to this like cross in the road where you're like, okay, either I have to get a warehouse and hire staff, or like, you have to figure out what that's going to look like. And for me, I was like, I don't want to manage inventory. I don't want to do those things. And so
Yeah.
it also makes me appreciate people who do that so much more, and makes me want to shop small and like know the value of what happens when you shop small. So I think that's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think personally, I had a really difficult time with the mindset shift of feeling like I was allowed to wholesale, because I just felt like, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I'm trying to print on good paper. I'm trying to like use the right inks, but I had this mindset, I think, just starting my art career in general and coming out of school, of like, there must be right ways to do things, and I'm probably going to do things the wrong way at first. And so I was just really afraid that I wasn't using the industry standard papers and the right cello thing. What are they called?
Sleeves, cello sleeves.
Cello sleeves. There we go. Yeah. And I was like so caught up on those things, and I think it was just my brain kind of, I don't know, it was like keeping me from taking that next step, but over some stuff that ended up being kind of silly. Because I think I was holding the paper and I was looking at the cards and I was like, these look good to me, but still there was some mindset block. And there's so many people that will like DM me and, come in with these same questions about like exactly what printer they need to work with, or if they're printing at home, what specific exact model of this printer do I need to do the cards? And I think it's just really easy to get hooked on trying to get those little details exactly right and keeping yourself from actually looking at the bigger picture and making that kind of imperfect action steps.
Katie, I'm so glad you said imperfect action. That's one of the things I talk about quite a bit, of like, done is better than perfect here. Because as creatives, we do have a tendency to overthink things. We do want all of the details and the nuance to be just perfect. We have high expectations of ourselves, and that carries into everything we do in our business. But at the same time, to your point, you're not the only one that agonized over paperweight and ink choices and printer options and cello sleeves. I literally field those questions every single day. And, no one's trying to gatekeep here. We want as many people to come into this industry as we possibly can. But I also can empathize and relate to why people are asking those questions, and if you take even just those, 3 or 4 questions you just mentioned, and you times that by 1,000, because that's how many questions people have as they start to wholesale, it can feel really overwhelming, and that holds people back from doing this too. And so I think one of my goals with Proof to Product is to really share openly and generously with people so that they don't get hung up on those nitty gritty details, because we have those answers for you and we'll give them to you. We've got the printer recommendations and all of that for you. But then also, like, as you continue down your path of growing your business, we have those answers too. And we're open to sharing those with you. And so I think, going back to what y'all said at the very beginning, the collaboration, the community, like, that's what my business is built on. And that's really how I feel like artists and creatives in general thrive. And so, yes, those questions are totally understandable, and they're a hang up for a lot of people. But getting yourself into circles that are going to help you not feel burdened by those basic questions so that you can keep moving is really going to benefit everybody.
I have an embarrassing story. I feel like I absolutely have to share, because it's like so embarrassing. I don't remember who the seller was, but when I first started making planners, I had a really hard time finding a manufacturing partner, and I ended up working with someone locally. I've worked with several manufacturers, and like part of the thing that made my planner what it was that I did pay so much attention to what the material was, and like
Yeah, the
planners
details.
were not popular at that, like they were popular, obviously they're planners, but they were less accessible, I feel.
They're a
And
very difficult product to create and to
yeah,
manufacture, even today. Very difficult.
yeah. And I, was doing that 12 years ago. And
Yeah.
so I remember when I first did my like first one, I was printing them like individually. They were like $40 each. I sent a message to someone. Granted, I was like in college. I sent a message to someone and I was like, hey, like, I'm just curious, like, where do you have these printed? I like made up a lie. I was like, somebody wants to like do this and I'm just like curious. And she wrote me back and was like, you should have just asked me and told me you were a seller and wanted to know where I print them.
Oh
And I was like,
no.
oh
Called
God.
out.
But I also like appreciated that she was like, if you had just come to me and said, where do you get these printed? I could have just like had a conversation with you. And maybe I could have even said like, hey, could I hire you? I admire your work. But it felt at the time, I remember this like vividly, it felt like I was supposed to gatekeep that information, and that therefore they were also supposed to gatekeep that, because that was what made them special. It's like not everyone knew how to do it.
Yeah.
And still to this day, I get like a little almost like uncomfortable in my skin when someone is like, where did you have these printed?
Well,
Yeah.
because it
And I'm
takes
like,
for freaking ever to
it
find the right
does.
partner. So it's like, dang
Right.
it. I took like many months to find this, and now I'm going to be like, here you go. But
Right. But I also think that like the process was part of what made it so
Yeah.
good, was because I cared so much about that. But also, I can't just answer you and say, like, this is the place I use, and all of a sudden you'll have a magic product. Like,
100%.
there's someone I follow who just came out with a planner, and she's like an influencer. She's not a designer. And I'm like, oh my God, if I could just get my hands on that, it's going to be so good. And like, I love that she was able to like put her own words, because she's like a very positive person, put her own words into a planner and a product. And I'm like, but if you worked with a designer who knew about this, it would be like the coolest product ever.
Yeah.
And it's like, there is this like uncomfortable nature about sharing something you've worked so hard for, that just you couldn't just Google or ask Chat GPT, or like, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
I loved that you created this space where you could do that, and not only could, but were encouraged to do that. And I don't really know exactly how we shift that narrative, except to have conversations like this where people are allowed to do that.
Yeah.
But also with the understanding that like, you can't just slide into any of our DMs and ask a question that is a full picture. Like, you can ask, where do you have these printed? But it's not the full answer. You need to say, like, can I have an hour of your time to ask you a couple questions and give you the whole picture? Even if you're talking about like pricing for a client, like, I need more information than just, where did you get this printed? Like, I can't steer you in the right direction if I don't know all the pieces.
The other thing I want to add to this conversation, because I do feel that it's a very important question. Like, again, we do not gatekeep. We have a huge vendor directory that we share with our students. Our students contribute to that vendor directory. It's a very fluid thing that we all provide details to. But Alana, to your point, every project is different. Every relationship with the vendor is different. Every brand's needs are different. And so I always encourage people, I say, do not message strangers on the internet and ask where they make their stuff. They're not going to be open to that. You don't have a relationship with them. But in a community like ours, where everybody kind of came through the same lessons and, they know the culture of our community, it is a safer place to share. But that being said, I still tell our like alumni who are doing really unique, different things, maintain what's proprietary, and it's okay to keep that to yourself. Like, you're not necessarily gatekeeping, but you spent years developing this relationship, this product. There's nuance here. How many rounds of sampling did you have to do? How much money did you invest in product that went wrong before you got it right? So I do think we need to be transparent. And I do think we need to share more openly, even on a public level. But also I think people need to have some maybe common sense or discretion around, like, just don't message a stranger on the internet and ask that stuff. Or to your point, like, maybe ask if they do consulting, and if you can, have an hour of their time to give them more context of what you're trying to do. So it's a balance though, right?
I think it's how they approach it too when they ask the question. Like, if I can tell I'm not their first, they didn't just have the thought of, I want to print my products and then immediately ask me every question. Like, if I can tell that they've done research and they got stuck somewhere and they've seen like a reel of mine that made them think I might have an answer that could help them, and they specifically referenced that, then I'm like, okay, you're not taking advantage of me. You actually have like put in some work and are just need a helping hand to get over this little hump. And that makes me a lot more willing to, spill my guts about everything, because we've all been in that situation. And just showing that you've tried to work through the problem a little bit, I think goes a
Yeah.
long way.
We also see it about other things in our community. So for example, the first time somebody ships a big order to a paper source or a Barnes and Noble or something, that's a really intimidating thing. They have a manual that's huge on the shipping requirements and how things need to go. That's not really information that's widely out on the internet. But within our community, we've talked about here's how to do it. And here's, this shifted. You should know that the label has to be printed this way or placed on the boxes this way, and so I want to paint this picture of like proprietary info. It just means we've never done that before, and we don't quite know how to do it. And some people are ahead of us in that. And if it's something that they feel comfortable sharing, then great. If it's something they're not comfortable, we have to respect that too. But I think there's a lot we don't know in business, and we're all still figuring things out, even if we've been doing this a really long time. So I just wanted to add that too.
Yeah. And something I want to say that I think, when we came into this conversation, we had one intention of where this is going to go. And I love that it's going in several other ones, because you're also an incredible business owner. And so when we talk about this, like there's no gatekeeping, like there is a fee to join some of these communities. Just like if you want to know everything we know about art licensing, sure, you can get as much as you want for free on our content, on our podcast. But like, we're going to give you more through a paywall because there's a value to it. And I think that's where like maybe the uncomfortable thing comes, is like if someone slides into your DMs and is asking a question that you specifically talk about having in a paid program, like we're allowed to ask for payment to access specific things and pieces of us and knowledge. And so it's like, within that, there's no gatekeeping. Ask us anything. But unless it's like NDA, we have had one instance where someone has been like, what was the client name? And we're like, we're literally not allowed to tell you. And it's like so uncomfortable. We're like, we'll hint at it. We'll be like, but if you go here, maybe you'll figure it out. And it's like, I just want to remind people that they're just because someone offers a paid service like this, doesn't mean that that's gatekeeping. Like people are allowed to charge for their expertise. And we have had some comments, very few, but that they're like, you only gave us this much information. It's like, well, this is a 35-second reel. So I'm not really sure how much information you wanted me to share. So just a reminder that
that's a good reminder. And I think the other thing with that is, I was in the corporate world for 20 years. I've been coaching product brands for almost 16 years now. I've coached over 30,000 product brands who are selling to shops all around, meaning I have a very unique viewpoint. I have 2 MBAs too, one in marketing, one finance. So what I don't say that to be braggalicious here, but I say it to like, I'm bringing a wealth of knowledge and a unique viewpoint to everything I do in my paid programs. And that includes being able to see within a lot of these 30,000 brands that I've coached, and I've seen what works, what doesn't. I can trace the patterns. I can see what's been worth people's time and what's not worth their time. So we can really cut to the chase. And just like all of you and the freelance artists listening, like if you've been doing this work for over, 5-10 years, people are paying for your experience, not the hours that you put into something. They're paying for that end result that's going to be amazing. And so, yes, there's definitely, I have a ton of free resources out on the internet. Like I said, our podcast, so many things for free. But truly, if people want the nuts and bolts and like the true, like step-by-step, that's in our paid programs. And I've worked hard to build these things, and so have you in your programming. And I think people just also need to use discretion in who they're hiring to teach them things, and make sure that who they're hiring really does have the background and the experience to be teaching that thing. So,
Ooh, the internet, it can be Wild West, and it can also be a treasure trove of delights.
Totally. And
paid for
nobody
his
knows
costs.
everything either. Like I am still continuing to invest in my professional development. I have coaches, I work with people. Like I'm a sponge soaking it up too so that I can bring it back to my people and show them how to do things.
I think that's the
Yeah.
hallmark of knowing you're learning from a good teacher is that they don't claim to know it all. I think
Yeah,
it's a
for
big
sure.
old red flag if they say, here's the exact path to making 300K, no changes needed, you'll make it tomorrow. This is
Totally.
everything. Yeah, big red flag there. Okay,
Yeah.
so we in this season of our life and business are conducting experiments
Yeah.
to kind of figure out where the overlap lies between the things that we really, really love to do and are passionate about and feel really good and fulfilled doing, and the things that make us money
Hmm.
and help us sustain our business and our families and all of the things that are, important businessy things to do. So we're looking for that overlap and running these experiments. And I'm wondering if we could like kind of run a theoretical experiment with you. Like
Sure.
maybe we are wondering what would happen if I diversified my revenue by getting into wholesale. So maybe we can like kind of go through the steps that you would take if you were helping someone kind of like, let's say they've already gone through and listened to your private podcast. They say, yes, I'm really interested in wholesale. I want to get started. What do they do next?
Sure. So the first thing I always tell people to focus on is their product first. And a lot of your listeners probably have a lot of different art that they've used for different projects that never really went anywhere. So like doing an audit would also be a good way to to start with this. When I say we start with our product, I want to make sure that you have enough product that selling wholesale makes sense. I want to make sure that your product is priced right for wholesale so that you're going to make money on every single order that goes out the door. I want to make sure that you have a SKU system and some of those foundational organizational pieces in place around your product line. And once we know that all of that is situated properly, then we move into looking at what sales tools we need for wholesale. And like we talked about at the front end of the show, selling to wholesale is very different than direct to consumer. So on the wholesale side, you need terms and conditions that detail how much money people need to spend with you and how many of each product design they're going to have to purchase. That's called MOQ. I'm going to get in the weeds a little here. It's minimum order quantity. They're not just buying one item from you. If they want to buy that greeting card or that art print, they're going to have to buy 6 of those greeting cards. That same design, they're going to have to buy 6 of them. If they're going to do art prints, they might have to buy 4 of that same design. But you're the one that sets those terms and conditions. You set those parameters and guardrails. So after we get the product ready, we move into sales tools, and that includes terms and conditions. We get a catalog or a line sheet together to show off your line. We typically want to have you somewhere online where people can look at stuff. So that's either typically on a Shopify site or on something like Fair, which is a third-party platform for wholesale. And we want to have the ability for people to see your product, know what they're going to have to spend with you, and then also place those orders, right? And once we know that those two pieces, your product and your sales tools, are in place, that's where we then move into our marketing arm of things. That's where we want to push traffic to your site. That's where we want to push buyers to your catalog and your line sheet, and we want them to see and touch. That's where we want to offer people samples that we send them in the mail. But also with that marketing arm is where we go into like pretty heavy research and development in terms of which stores are a good fit for us, because our products are not going to be for everybody. So finding the right stores for what you're selling is a critical piece of this. And that's just a lot of digging. It's a lot of Googling. It's a lot of visiting stores if they're local to you and getting that mailing list going so that you can start the pitch process.
Yeah.
I'll take a pause here in case you have any follow-up questions because I
Yeah,
feel like I
no,
just
I
spoke a
just
lot.
No, that's amazing. I just want to like reiterate that finding the right stores for you and your line is like write it down. You know what I mean? Like highlight it, circle it, listen to it again. I think this is a pain point we specifically see. Yes, every single person probably, especially living in the US, wants their work in Target. I mean, that would be a dream, right? But there might be other stores that are going to be an even like more immediate yes for you. And it's not to say you can't also strive for Target. Like, let's all do it. Let's take over Target with small businesses. But I just think that people get hung up on seeing what their peers are doing and what stores they're in. And like one of those stores might really focus on like folk art and a specific style, and yours just like doesn't fit. Then it's just like setting yourself up for rejection. And I feel like people kind of jump over that instead of really
Yes.
spending the time to make sure that store or that client or whatever is a good fit for them. And it's like, I can't stress it enough that it's so important to find the right stores.
Alana, I also want to add here, a lot of people jump to marketing before the product and sales stuff is ready too. And that does them a major disservice, because here's why. You only get one time to make a good first impression, right? And if you start reaching out to these stores and they're either not a good fit, like you mentioned, or if your product line's not ready, or if your pricing and your terms and conditions aren't in alignment with industry standard, people are going to, like, that's a red flag to them. They're like, this line isn't ready. They don't seem like they know what they're doing. But it's exciting. People want to pitch stores. They want to like get their stuff out there. They want to do the marketing side. They want to be on social. The marketing is sexy and fun, but the business needs that foundations of the product ready and the sales ready for the marketing to do its job, for it to bring in the sales. And so that's another kind of misstep that I see folks making.
Interesting. Yeah, makes sense.
So overall, this sounds like a hell of an experiment. If we're going to run this
It's a big one, huh?
If we're going to run this experiment, there's a lot of prep that goes into it. This is definitely not like a passive setup to this income stream. There's definitely like parts of it that can be passive later on-ish, as passive can, be. It's always got quotations around it. But the beginning part of this is hefty with the setup. So do you think that there's a way for people to kind of dip their toe into the wholesale world? And if so, what does that look like, feel like? How do you just sort of get a taste?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. If you start asking any group of people, do you want to buy my product? You're going to get some yeses, you're going to get some nos, right? So the most immediate experiment you could run to see if your product is viable for wholesale is really checking your numbers to make sure that financially you can make this work. But then secondly is making sure there's an interest in your product. If you have a direct-to-consumer Etsy shop, Shopify, and you have some proven sales there, there's interest in your product. So that is a good indicator. That's a good experiment to play on the direct-to-consumer side. Make sure you have an interest. And once you can see that there's an interest, the next experiment I would do is probably, doing a poll on Instagram saying, are there shop owners that you think I should reach out to, or that you think my products would be a good fit for? Or like Alana was saying, contact a couple of your local stores and say, I'm interested in getting into wholesale. Can I come pick your brain for 30 minutes or something and, pay them or bring them coffee or something like that? Now, we're not pitching them in these meetings. We're not trying to sell our product to them. We're asking them questions about their shop, about what they're seeing in the industry, what their customers are looking for. We're collecting information to help us make a good decision as to whether this is the right avenue for our products. You can ask them questions too about their buying preferences. How often are you buying? What are you looking for? Do you ever support local artists? Things like that. So I would say having some conversations before you go full board into all the steps I just told you are necessary to successfully sell wholesale. Having conversations with shop owners, having conversations with other brands, but also being mindful that everyone's so busy right now. You want to be careful with how you ask for those meetings, I suppose is the best way to phrase that.
I really appreciate hearing kind of what is it in business speak, like the minimum viable product,
Yep, MVP.
I've been talking a lot about, getting over that hump of perfectionism, because that's something I'm actively working through in my life. And I think the more that we take these little bite-sized steps and also validate that we're, moving in the right direction and we're not putting the cart before the horse, as so many of us are excited to do, like Alana and I were talking about, this project that we're doing with the experiments and how we wanted to brand the whole thing and do this and do that and do this. And then I was having a conversation recently with someone who reminded me, like, hey, why don't you validate the idea first? Why don't you make sure that it's resonating with people and you don't have to go completely full out? Yeah. So I like to do I think I should be doing mini experiments that continue to snowball into the big experiment.
Yeah.
Alana, did you have a question?
I was just going to add that all of the things you're saying are the things we say about licensing too, is like a lot of people, I think, and this is not to like say it's wrong. We get so excited about how we could see our art touch multiple people, like
Yep.
someone purchasing it in a store or like walking through the aisles and seeing it. And we get so excited that we sometimes just skip to the fun part.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to be bad at something and or to like not see the immediate results. And yeah, we just see this so often, and we've done it too, of course. Like, thank goodness that Katie and I have each other, because I'll say to her, like, this isn't working, and she's like, we haven't even started. Okay, hold on. We literally had this conversation this morning. She was like, that's good, like we're getting there, this is progress. And so yeah, I think just a reminder that, like, especially people come to us, and I know this happens in, you can have an agent represent your product line, or a rep, and people come to us and say, like, oh, I want to get into licensing immediately, I want an agent. And my previous agent said to me, before you come and try and get an agent, like, basically validate your idea by booking several jobs, so that you understand what you're asking an agent to do for you, like what the role of an agent is. Are they pitching your work to people? Are they helping you with contracts? Like, what is their role? And if you don't have that validation, then an art licensing agent, if you have no experience in the industry or have like not a full portfolio or product ready, they're not going to be like, yeah, definitely, like, you've made 3 pieces of great art, it's sold. And it's not to say your art isn't great, it's just to say, we just want you to know more about what we have to offer you.
Yes.
And see how you work and how people respond before we can just like throw all of our eggs into your basket. And so I think the same thing rings true for wholesale.
Definitely.
And you can start small. I think the other thing is that these relationships, like you said, go into your local shop. The relationship building is always at the core. Clients can come back to you time and time again. Just one wholesale shop can be like the perfect way to test. And if you just walk into your local store and say, I want to sell my work here, instead of like purchasing something maybe and then coming in a couple more times and saying, oh my gosh, I just love your shop, it's so well curated. Maybe the 3rd or 4th time you say, I've really wanted to share this with you. I actually have my own line. I would love to bring it in sometime and hear more about how you work with artists. I'd love to know if you work with local artists, or I'm really new to it, I've never done it before. Like, that is very different than walking into a store for the first time and just be like, can I have your card? I'm going to send you an email with a pitch.
Yeah.
Or I'll just pitch you right now while you're working.
Yeah. Let me just show up unannounced and let me show you everything I have to offer. Yeah. That's
just open your coat.
I've got samples.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Don't do that, friends. Don't do that.
Don't do it. Oh my gosh, so
Katie,
funny.
I know there are so many pieces to this wholesale puzzle, which is why you have to like have whole courses and podcasts about it. We can definitely not get to everything in one episode of a podcast, unfortunately. But there is one piece that you mentioned you would have in place before you do much of anything else, and that's the pricing. Is it going to be financially viable for you? And this was very confusing to me when I first started out with wholesale. So I thought it would be, maybe if we're going to go into any specifics, maybe it's this area. Sure. So I got my first request on Etsy when I was selling some posters. Some shop in like Germany was like, do you wholesale them? I said yes, and then Googled wholesale.
Which, Katie, this is a theme for you. This is how all of your work has started.
That's how everything starts always. But I ended up pulling a price out of my butt, and it wasn't based in any kind of logic. So I had to find out later on how wholesale pricing kind of works and how you have to structure the pricing differently than you normally would. So Katie, I would love any insights that you can provide in that area.
Sure. So it's really important that folks understand that they are the ones that set their wholesale price, and the wholesale price should be the first price that they set, and then the retail price is built off of that. And that's a very confusing thing for people that have only been selling online retail, right? Because they set their retail price, and in setting that retail price, they probably looked around at what others were selling things for. Maybe they ran their production costs to figure out what they needed to make money on it, but likely they just looked and Googled and saw what other people were selling for and set their price. Now, I know I was the same way when I started too. I saw Katie raise her hand there. But here's the truth of the matter. We encourage folks to run their numbers in 2 directions. We call it bottom up and then top down. And from bottom up, what we're doing is we are looking at your production costs, meaning we are looking at how much it costs you to create that one greeting card or art print. And we're looking at the paper, the ink, the cello sleeve, any labor time that is spent if you're printing at home or if you're outsourcing that, what that costs, the sleeving time, like any other pieces of embellishment or whatever that go into your product. And we want to know what that hard cost is to produce that one product. And that gives us like our break even number, right? That tells us if I don't sell this thing for 50 cents or whatever it might be, I'm going to lose money on the deal. And so that gives us our like bottom line. And then top down analysis is where we do that Googling and we look around at what the market can bear to see like, okay, what is the going rate for this item that I'm selling? Now, I'll be totally honest with you. When I went into wholesale for the first time, I made a ton of mistakes. I went in to my international trade show 6 months after starting my business, and I put my greeting card at like, I don't know, I was like 50 cents or $1 over market value because I just didn't know any better. I didn't, I had done all my research, I crunched all my numbers, but I just didn't know. And so I didn't sell very much of those because I was completely out of market. And so doing that top down research and figuring out what the market rates are, what it can bear is really important, because if you price your stuff too high, you're going to price yourself out of the market. If you price your products too low, then you're leaving money on the table and losing money, right? And so your wholesale price is going to be in the sweet spot between the bottom up and the top down. But in terms of how wholesale money works, you're going to set that wholesale price at a profitable level for you. And then typically retail is at least twice that wholesale price. Some stores, especially nowadays, are marking things up more than 2 times your wholesale price, but some will go as high as 2.6 or even 3 times your wholesale price. But if you're selling both direct to consumer and wholesale, your Etsy shop should be at least 2 times what your wholesale price is. So again, we get the wholesale numbers figured out. We know that that's profitable at that level. And then we at least 2 times it, or even more if you can, for your market in your Etsy shop or your Shopify site. People get really confused about the fact that buyers are going to set their retail price at whatever works for them. For example, a store in Manhattan in New York, which has a lot higher overhead, they're probably going to mark your product up, 2.5 instead of just the regular two-time markup. A store in a lower cost of living area might only do the 2 markup. Ultimately, you set that wholesale price, they're going to set the retail price at whatever is suitable for their customer and their needs in their geographic area. And then again, on your side of things, if you're also selling direct to consumer, you will at least mark it up to 2 times the wholesale price.
Yeah, so helpful. Something that I ran into was Katie said her first inquiry was from Germany. My planners, which planners were really heavy, so they're like significantly more expensive to ship. I had someone want to order 50 in Hawaii, and I literally would make negative dollars based on the bulk discount. And I followed all the formulas, and I'm curious, is that an issue and I did the formula backwards, but I feel like shipping has been a huge
So shipping it's a huge, and for something like a planner, it's a big cost, right? So one thing to note is for wholesale orders, the customer is going to pay the shipping fees. And so you're going to add that to the invoice after you package up the order and weigh it and all that. So you should not be eating those fees. Where we get into trouble is when people don't factor in things like, well, one, when they offer free shipping when they probably shouldn't, and that does eat into their margin. But the other thing we get into trouble with is when people aren't factoring in some areas of growth. So one example of this is people that are selling on Faire are often the third-party platform we mentioned earlier. They're most likely paying commission on those orders. And if they haven't factored in that 15% commission, they're going to be losing that on each order. So one of the pieces when we talk about running your numbers from bottom up, we also factor in growth as an option. Like if you wanted to start working with sales reps in the future, or you're selling on Faire, or some of those other pieces, we want to build that into our pricing so that we're not taking a hit. And if you're not using those things, then you have the extra margin to play with still. But yeah, Alana, there's a lot of the prize fees, if you will. And if you're not, if you don't have the full picture, you can get shorted on some of that.
It was like a shiny penny for me. I remember being like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. This is going to be so good. And they were like, because I'm ordering so many, could you cover shipping? And I like spent days trying to figure out. And I was like, I literally cannot sell this order to you. I
Yeah.
cannot cover the shipping, even though it's such a big order. It really felt like a shiny penny. And it's a whole different world. I mean, I think Katie, you've done a really good job of explaining that, like, you do, just like with anything as a creative business owner, you have to not only be creating the product, but you have to be thinking about how you're scaling a business. Like,
Yeah.
Especially with wholesale, because it's a whole different stream than direct to consumer.
You also have to be careful who you take advice from. And I know we kind of alluded to this earlier when we were talking about educational programming, but a concrete example of this is Fair, the online platform, was telling people to lower their minimum order amount. This was like a year or so ago. They were telling people to lower their minimum order amount or even get rid of it. So saying that, like, do a $25 wholesale order. I did a podcast episode where I ran through the numbers to show people that if you fulfill a $25 wholesale order, you are very likely losing money on that order. So for this platform to tell everybody to lower their minimums, it was doing them a real disservice, because many of those people were then shipping out orders that were not profitable, and they were finding themselves in the hole. And if they are not numbers people, if they're creative folks who don't like to look at the numbers, which is a lot of my audience, they would find themselves like caught off guard later. And so again, it kind of ties back to understanding your numbers, understanding the nuance, and then also being careful where you're getting advice from, just so that you're looking at things from a lens of what is best for my business. And Alana, to your point too, it's okay to say no to some of these deals. Sometimes we don't have the confidence in the early days to say, no, this doesn't work for me, but it is okay. If they're asking you to do free shipping and you can't really make the numbers work, it's okay to say, no, I can't do that. Or here's maybe an alternative. It's tough. It's tough. I think, especially when we're solo entrepreneurs, we feel like, especially at the beginning too, when we're very excited and we want to be in every store, it's really exciting and we want to say yes to everything, but also saying yes to everything is not always the most advantageous for our business. And so having those boundaries is really important, but also understanding the numbers and the nuance and paying attention to them is very important.
What's the word again for when you don't fully sell wholesale, but you put the product in the shop and they give you so they give you money only if it sells. That's called consignment.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to flag that really quickly too, because early in my wholesale journey, a lot of shops were like, we don't do wholesale with like first time artists or whatever. We like to test with consignment. And I had a lot of really bad experiences with consignment. Same. I don't know, Katie. Yeah, I was going to say, do you feel similarly about it?
I do. I have never seen a consignment deal work out in favor of the brand. And it is not something that I recommend. I recommend anyone who truly wants to sell wholesale that you get your ducks in a row and you only offer wholesale. Again, I know it is, very exciting when somebody's interested in you and they're offering you a chance to have shelf space, but you take on the burden of that product until it sells through. And that means if it gets shop worn, you lose out on the money. It means if, you're responsible for restocking and stuff, like it just puts a lot more work on the brand. And frankly, I'd rather you put that time and effort into making sure that your wholesale foundations are strong and just telling people, I'm sorry, we don't do consignment, but here's our wholesale catalog and we can fulfill that if you're interested.
Yeah, really appreciate that caveat, because that word came up a lot for me and I was like, duh, in the beginning.
Yeah. So, and we want to say yes. We want to say yes to these things, but it's not
right. I know that's the hardest part.
Yeah, I've seen what happened a lot for me and my sister who has jewelry is that the product would then sit on the shelves forever. And then they'd be like, it couldn't sell these. It's been 3 years. And she's like, I don't even make those anymore. Like, it was like a different style, or like her work has gotten so much better. Like, what do you want me to do with it? Like,
yeah,
she could have done better selling them, herself. And so it's just really interesting.
Yeah. And the shop owner isn't motivated to push it through or like suggest it or really care about it if they don't have skin in the game. It's just like in a dusty corner. They're like, it doesn't, no skin off my back. So I just want to ask one question about the experiment. If we run whatever experiment we see, we're trying outreach, we're trying to put ourselves out there. We did all the things and nobody's biting. We're not making the sales. We're not seeing the results we want to see. What are the things that you look at to potentially tweak, or how do you figure out what's going wrong?
Yeah. So we go back to the basics. We go back to your product line. We look at your numbers. We make sure that the product line is cohesive, that it all makes sense together, that it could be merchandised on a shelf together. We look at the numbers to make sure those are correct, that they're in alignment with industry standards. Then we look at, like, again, we kind of just like recycle and go back to the beginning and say, okay, did we do all these things correctly? I get this question a lot, Katie. I hear from people who are like, I'm in dozens of shops already, but I've totally plateaued and I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's wrong. And frankly, if I have 5 minutes with their catalog, I can usually pick out what's wrong. It's usually boiling down to their pricing, their terms and conditions, maybe their product line itself and how they have things kind of curated and laid out in the catalog. The problem is very rarely how they're pitching themselves or the pitch itself. I get a lot of people like, oh, it's the subject line of my email, or like it's the body of my email. And no, it's not. It typically boils down to the basics, the product, the numbers, the sales tools. We need to make it as easy as possible for our customers to purchase from us. And if we simplify those foundational pieces, that makes it an easier yes for them. So that when we do send those pitch emails, they are going to open them, they are going to click through it. But usually, like I said, it has nothing to do with the actual pitch itself or how often you're emailing or what the subject line is. It usually pulls back on the product itself, the pricing, or the sales terms and conditions. So I would go back and audit those pieces first.
That's really helpful insight. And if our listeners are in that kind of situation and they need your eyes on their catalog or whatever it is, what's the best way for them to get that?
Yeah, so we run our paper camp program, which is our wholesale intensive twice a year. And the next one, the 45th round, is going to be starting March 3rd, and we'll open registration a couple weeks prior to that. I do catalog audits in there for anyone who already has an existing catalog. They have the option to sign up for an audit where I do a video tutorial and things like that. So that's the best way, because we're going to give you soup to nuts what you need to know to wholesale. And also you're going to be immersed in this amazing community of people who are working towards the same goals. And obviously when we do things together and we're all kind of sharing information, we're going to move things more quickly. So that is that's the best place to go. Now, if folks aren't ready for that, if they're not sure, they should start with our podcast. It's called Proof to Product. It's on every platform available. And also that is Wholesale Right For You podcast that I mentioned earlier. That has a lot of concrete, actionable steps that they can start taking now to get things ready to go. One thing about me is I love an action plan. I love a strategy, but I also love giving people the tools to start, even if they're not in my paid programs. So yeah, you'll find a lot of great storytelling and case studies on our podcast too, of like our alumni community and how they've built their businesses in different ways that really do mirror the life they want to have. So Alana was saying earlier, like, I didn't want a warehouse. I didn't want a team. I didn't want all that stuff. And it is possible to still sell wholesale without all of that. But there is, to your point, Alana, there is a tipping point where it's like, okay, if I do want to expand this further, I do need the further infrastructure and the team and the warehouse and all that. But you can also do it small too. So
I love that. So helpful. I feel like both Katie and I said your resources have been really instrumental to both of us in our careers.
Thank you.
And whenever someone says, I have a product line, what should I do? We're sending them your way, of course. And I just love how you've been able to balance, which I think is difficult to do. I think you've been able to balance like being a business with also being like someone with such experience in the industry as a creative.
Thank you.
Yeah, just like a wealth of knowledge. The way you approach your business is so authentic, such an inspiration. And we didn't even talk about the thing we intended to talk about on here. So we'll have to have you back to talk about
would love to.
More strategic ways that you can sell your work, whether it's wholesale or direct to consumer. So we'll definitely have to do a follow-up episode with you. But otherwise, thank you so much.
Yes,
just
thank you, Katie.
Is there any other links where like Instagram,
yeah, for sure.
Would that be the best place? Okay.
Yeah, I hang out mostly on Instagram. I'm at proof2product.com. That's a TO in the middle, not a number 2. And then our website is proof2product.com. And then that private podcast again, if you want to find out if wholesale is the right next step for your business, is proof2product.com/privatepod.
Check out the show notes for all of those links.
Amazing.
And thank you, Katie.
Thank you for having me. This
anytime
is awesome.
I get a chat with a Katie, especially
I know, right? Thanks, ladies, for having me. Happy to come back anytime.
Amazing. Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
All good things.